This is Horizon Call of the Mountain, part of one of Sony's biggest IPs, the third title in the Horizon franchise, and the first only available in VR. Explore and ascend the mountainsides while fending off an array of robotic creatures in search of redemption as you unearth a new threat in the Sundom. This released February 22nd, 2023 for the PSVR 2 headset for $60 US. Is this the next chapter in the Horizon series, a VR experience, or something else entirely? Let's find out, shall we? Hello climbers, this is Ryan for the VR Grid, and before we get to it, if you enjoyed this vid, hit those like and subscribe buttons and leave us a comment and let us know how you feel about the game. You can also catch us live every Thursday night at 9 PM Eastern Time for the Virtual Boys podcast, where we talk all things VR. Now, let's get to it. I have dabbled in the Horizon franchise, so I'm not entirely unfamiliar with this strange future where dangerous machines in the shape of animals roam the landscape, and small groups of people survive while using some of the tech from the old ones, who caused a massive war that devastated the world hundreds of years earlier. In Call of the Mountain, you don't play as Aloy, the main character from the Flat games, but as Rias, an ex-Karja soldier who's been disgraced and banished for his past associations. However, as a climber, your skills are needed by a small tribe, and with the promise of redemption should you succeed, you embark on a perilous journey to find one of the village's missing people and make some unnerving discoveries along the way. For those looking for the third-person action from the Flat games, this is not here, and instead you control Rias in typical first-person fashion. After surviving a deadly river ride, you'll have to scrounge for nearby supplies and arm yourself with the weapons and tools you need to fend off machines and climb to that nearby village. A plethora of comfort options are available that I won't break down here as I played with all the comfort off, but for those that need assistance in VR, you're covered. When walking, you can only move at one of 3 default speeds, chosen in the options menu, as there is no way to run, which did annoy me at first, as not a lot typically happens when you are allowed to free roam on the ground, but that slower speed did allow me just to take in some of the impressive vistas, so it didn't bother me after too long, and the fastest walk speed isn't too bad either. Climbing is the crux of this game, and you'll spend a lot of time in here doing just that, as you initially scale these cliff sides just by hand, grabbing at any white capped surfaces, though as you progress through the 8-hour-ish story, new tools become available that allow you to swing across gaps or even create your own zipline. I cannot stress enough that there is a lot of climbing in here, and there is no choice but to move your arms to grab the next ledge or pull at your axe to heave yourself up on flatter surfaces. At the game's onset, when you have no tools, climbing is quite easy, and well, I guess it's easy throughout most of the game. A few awkward choices do hamper the fun in these sections. For starters, every new tool gets added to a wheel which you can bring up by pressing A or X, and then using a thumbstick to highlight what you want to choose, letting a quick timer fill up before that item appears in your hand. It's an absolutely cumbersome system that demands your full attention, as whenever I looked and chose my next tool, if I looked away, the game seemed to always select the tool above it. When you're finished with that tool, just drop it and it will fall to the ground, but can easily be summoned again by using the wheel once more. On more than a few occasions, that failed summoning caused me to quick death, though thankfully, the autosave system placed me back mere seconds from where I perished, letting me try again. Some gaps can be jumped and are marked with symbols to remind you what you need to do, and to do that, you'll have to hold the grip buttons and swing your arms, which triggers a slow motion jump, which does allow you to grab a needed tool in midair, but in situations where you're just grabbing at a rope or ledge with your hands, it would have been nice just to leap and enjoy the thrills that slow motion removes. Those issues aside, the climbing here is really well done, some of the best I've ever experienced in VR in fact, as you won't just be scaling mountains, but massive monuments, ancient buildings, and just about every other structure that can be scalable. When nothing gets in the way of climbing, I enjoyed looking for my next grab point or path, moving up or down, and while much of the game is linear, I was still quite satisfied with scaling the paths put before me. Combat is up next, and unsurprisingly, your bow will be your main choice throughout the bulk of the game as you face off against various machines from the franchise. When you square up against a foe of any size, free movement is taken away and you can now only move or dash left or right as you circle the enemy. I can see why the developers chose this system, but due to those restrictions, I found every encounter to be fairly similar as the enemy attacks are scripted and easy to spot, and thus easy to avoid, while still unleashing volleys of arrows their way. You'll face an array of smaller watchers, flying stormbirds, a massive thunderjaw, and a host more familiar machines, and while these encounters might not be the most engaging at times, they are few and far between, and when they did pop up, it was typically a nice break from all the climbing. The archery also works quite well, thanks in large part to the eye tracking which can be toggled, meaning that where you are looking is more often than not where your arrow will shoot, as long as your bow is also aimed in that general direction. Additionally, you also unlock many of the elemental arrow types found in the franchise, like Blaze, Tear, and Electric Bolts, which have additional effects or provide ongoing damage and can be crafted from parts found hidden in containers along your journey. Crafting is as simple as turning your bow flat in your hands and choosing the arrow you want to use. If you don't have an arrow type made, you can quickly craft it by selecting it, which then displays the components you need to grab and place on an arrow, with all this happening in extremely slow motion, so in the heat of combat, you aren't left panicking as the enemy closes in. A blast sling also shows up in the latter half of the campaign, mixing up encounters a bit as the new weapon affords even more choices while in combat. I know I sound like I'm probably being a little harsh when it comes to each of these mechanics, and while I am picking them apart, and do feel like some choices made were obtuse and other mechanics could be tweaked to work better, nothing in here is broken, and for the most part, works as intended. There are additional goals and interactions scattered throughout the game that do add to the fun and replay value as well, including multiple paths and a fun little crafting system where you need to build a new tool. In each stage, there are totems hidden throughout that can be shot for those collector hunters out there. Campfires let you travel back to Nora Village at any time, where, if it's daytime, you can talk to the few people you've met and ask them select questions, expanding upon the story. I found a flute early on that would make noise when I brought it to my mouth. A large gong was begging for me to hit with a hammer, which I did. You can build cairns that challenge you to surpass a specific height, or even just paint your own murals on a nearby wall. It's those little extra details that not only mix up the gameplay, but flesh out this world in quaint and satisfying ways, and every time I stumbled across the next little exercise, I had to do it. There are also challenge, arena, and tour modes to further pad the game time, but outside of the tour, the other modes didn't really hold my interest as I much preferred the story, but if you want to shoot targets, run an obstacle course, or enjoy more of the combat, you can. Now, where Call of the Mountain is special is in the presentation, and for all my complaints up to this point, powering through some of these more mundane parts will always reward you with the next oh wow visual moment. Every single second is a spectacle, whether it's the opening boat ride when machines are all around you, or scaling the side of a mountain, as looking anywhere reveals an attention to detail we expect from non-AAA VR titles, making this easily one of the best looking VR games to ever be made. In fact, outside of some very rare clipping way off in the distance, or some texture loading after quick traveling using campfires, what's here is next to flawless whether you're just looking at a rock face or casting your gaze on the mountains below or above you. The machines look equally impressive up close, and the larger ones are downright scary as they rip apart your surroundings while trying to attack you. The first half of the story does keep you in similar vistas, but there's enough dynamic in those that I was never once bored with my surroundings, and even still, things switch up later in the game that offer up settings that I've just never seen in a game before, and I honestly can't count the amount of times I just stopped to take it all in. Everything in here is on point, from lighting effects, the details in dust and falling pebbles as you grab or latch onto a new surface, waterfalls, grass, villages, and NPCs, with all of that ambience further being aided by the haptics in both the headset and controllers. The Sense controllers are truly next level when it comes to VR. The subtle ripple of water on my hands as I dipped into a river, or used my axes to climb a sheer rock face, every interaction felt substantial and truly added another layer to immersion. The headset haptics are also no joke, offering up more than a few jaw-dropping moments, like when a long neck approached with each step increasing the vibration of my head until it walked right over me, shaking my head intensely, or even in combat as my headset would always let me know if I took damage and had to seek out a nearby apple to help recoup my health. Bottom line here is the haptics in the PSVR 2 headset, when used properly, like in Call of the Mountain, can bring a game to the next level. It's no surprise then that with near perfect visuals comes near perfect audio design, with the largest standout being the spatial audio, which just adds even more life to this already beautiful world. The soundtrack might leave you alone while climbing, but kicks in during battles and any other more dramatic moments, though oftentimes may be much more subtle, accentuating a peaceful view and never gets in the way or becomes overpowering.
It's getting suspicious. Oh no. Please.
Rias will often talk to himself, either elaborating on his feelings on what just happened, or dropping not so subtle clues to ensure I was moving in the right direction, and when in town you can briefly converse with the locals, asking them some simple questions before moving on. Bottom line here is the presentation across the board is next level and does set a new standard for VR gaming. Call of the Mountain is not a perfect game, not even close, and I think was designed to be played in smaller doses, as I did find myself getting fatigued by the whole thing once I reached the halfway point. Though I did play through the story in 3 longer sittings. Things do mix up as the game progresses, but the core mechanic of a lot of climbing, a little bit of walking, and occasional combat does make up a bulk of the gameplay and does feel quite samey at times. That said, powering through any repetition reveals entirely new areas to explore and views to take in, and when I was enjoying what I was doing, I was enamored with the game and couldn't wait to see what spectacle I was going to run into next. It's not perfect, but what's here is a treat that everyone needs to experience, and thanks to that quick 5-minute boat tour, everyone can at least see where VR has come in the last 6 years. In some ways, this feels like VR for beginners, which is probably who this was designed for, but there should be enough here to keep anyone entertained for the whole journey. It might be priced close to premium non-VR games, but what's here is a showpiece, and I'm looking forward to not only showing this off to others, but hopping back in to enjoy this world myself, and maybe hunt down some more of those totems. I'm going to give Horizon Call of the Mountain a 7.5 out of 10. The game is good, but the presentation is mind-blowing. If you enjoyed this review, please do all the things to help the channel out. And that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching.